This is IAQ Radio, Indoor Air Quality Radio, the voice of the indoor air quality industry, with your hosts, Radio Joe Hughes and the Z-Man, Cliff Zlotnick. And now, Radio Joe Hughes.
Good day wherever you're listening from, and welcome to episode 485 of IAQ Radio. It's Friday, November 10th, 2017, and today we welcome Joe Nagan, Home Building Technology Services of Kaukauna, Wisconsin. And we're looking forward to a great show on building science. Had a chance to talk with Joe, and looking forward to talking a little bit about building science, energy, efficiency, and indoor air quality. But before we do, let's thank our marquee sponsors.
IAQ Radio marquee sponsors are John Don Products, where restoration and abatement contractors shop. Visit them at jondon.com. That's JONDON.com. Healthy Indoor Magazine, a free online digital magazine for industry professionals and consumers. Subscriptions are available at IAQ.net. Particles Plus, engineers and manufacturers, feature rich particle counters, air quality monitoring, instrumentation, and vacuum pump technology. ParticlesPlus.com. Count on us.
Okay, please be sure to thank our sponsors for their support of IAQ Radio when you inquire about their services or products. And last but not least, please visit the IAQ Training Institute website for the most current dates for the training you trust at IAQtraining.com. And last but not least, we do have continuing education credits available for those of you that need recertification for the ACAC or ABIH, or any number of groups will accept the IAQ Radio continuing ed credits. Just email me at joe.hughes@IAQtraining.com. We'll get you out a quiz. All right, let's turn it over to the Z-Man for today's IAQ Radio trivia question.
And now you can win a cool prize. It's time for the IAQ Radio Trivia question. Be the first to correctly answer. Simply email your answer to czlotnick@cs.com, or if listening live, just text your answer from your computer. And now, here's the Z-Man with this week's IAQ Radio Trivia question.
Hello, everyone. I'm sorry to report no one identified Puerto Rico is the name of that island's first capital. The IQ Radio question for today, Friday, November 10th, 2017, has been sponsored by Ideas, the solution chemistry company creating unique solutions to odor removal, surface cleaning, and decontamination problems. Here is today's trivia question. Why is today, November 10, 2017, important in U.S. military history? Before I go, I'd like everyone, tomorrow is Veterans Day, and I'd like everyone to just do something nice for a veteran. Back to you, Joe.
Sounds good, Cliff. Thank you. Okay, today's guest is Joe Nagan of Home Building Technology Services. He's up in Wisconsin, and since 1985, he's been involved in residential building science research, both in the United States and Canada. He's also been very active in statewide conservation efforts in Wisconsin. He worked with the Wisconsin Energy Conservation Corporation of Madison, helped to co-author a nationally recognized Wisconsin Energy Star Homes program, where he served as the technical director. More recently, he's been working on the Statewide Focus On Energy program, which is a newer program started in 2011. Currently in effect, they have now certified over 25,000 new homes collectively. All right, Joe, do we have you on the line?
Yes, sir. Good morning.
Good morning. Welcome, and thanks for joining us. How did you get started back in the mid-'80s? What got you interested in building science? Did you start out as a builder, or have you always done like a consulting?
Well, that's the magic question, Joe. For years, I was heavy into automobiles, car racing, engine building, things of that nature. So I always had a pretty good mechanical background and always wanted to know how things worked. And in 1984, I built a small little house out near my shop in local Wisconsin, Kaukauna, Wisconsin. And, of course, all my friends were builders, and they would give me all this good advice about how to do this and how to do that. And we did most of the work ourselves other than the mechanicals. And then after living in that thing for about a year, I was very unhappy with it. I wasn't comfortable. The utility bills weren't anywhere what everyone told me they should be. And I was just unhappy, and I thought, okay, there's got to be a way of figuring this out. We can figure out anything on a mechanical device. And I got poking around a little bit and asking some of my builder friends who gave me information and advice during construction, and they said, well, heck, that's like everybody does it. And I thought, that's just not a good enough answer. So I dug in my heels and started looking around, and I went to talk to a window contractor friend of mine, actually a salesman, and I was sitting in his office waiting for him to get out of his meeting, and I was reading a builder magazine. This was now in 1989, and I saw an ad for the IBA organization and was reading about this upcoming conference they were going to have in Denver, Colorado. I never did stay and talk to my window friend. I tore the page out of that builder magazine, called the 800 number, got a hold of Howard Faulkner at the University of Gorham, Maine. He was head of the IBA organization at that time. Asked him if I could come out there as a homeowner and figure out how houses work. And in 1990, that's when I really dug in and attended my first conference. So it was my own bad luck, if you will, that got me where I am today.
Huh. And IBA is EEBA, the Energy and Environmental Builders Association, I believe, is what that acronym stands for?
Yeah, I think that they might have tweaked that a little bit now. I think it's called Energy and Efficiency Building Alliance or something like that. But basically the same organization in terms of their goals, yes.
I used to see a lot about them in the earlier days when I started really diving into the indoor air quality in more depth. Are they still very active? Do you still communicate with that group?
Well, they still are up and running. Over the years, it started as a real sort of what I would consider a hardcore group of actual hands-on builders when that organization was first started, I believe, in the early 80s. And it kind of morphed over time, and they went through some reorganizational issues and challenges just like other organizations. It used to be a member organization. It's no longer that. But they're still around, and they still have that same goal of dealing with building performance and all the other associated issues with new home construction. Yes.
So what did you learn? What mistakes did you make, and what mistakes do I always love these stories when people tell them, we've been building that way for 40 years. I never had a complaint. I get that all the time up here. What did you do wrong?
Well, it was interesting. I thought that I can picture it now, looking back at, I did all the framing myself with a couple of friends. We did all the insulating, wiring, everything. And what I didn't know at that time, as an outsider, was the substantial importance on air sealing a building. At that time, everybody just said, hey, make sure you put in that magic vapor retarder thing, so we did the magic plastic and everything, but didn't have any idea on the implication of the air tightness potential value of that, which is certainly something I hammer on people now. But other than that, there were some things, even with the ductwork. We had a couple of different contractors bidding on it. One of them wanted to stick the stuff in the attic. The other guy wanted to do it interior. But there was just what I really found interesting is that if I could step forward 10 years after that, when I first started looking around, now I know conclusively that you can reliably calculate, project, estimate, and plan a building project from the ground up to get the results you're looking for if you're willing to spend the time to do that. And that was a major learning curve, and that's what I use in my teachings and my trainings now.
So did your home have a basement?
Well, this was actually a building over a tuck-under garage, which made it a little bit more interesting. I actually decided to use the floor as the thermal separation between the garage below and the living area above. Oh. And it had some cantilevers, which were really brutal. Again, I didn't understand the massive importance of air sealing. And out here in the country where I don't have any buildings within a mile on either side, I get some substantial winds in the winter, and it would blow that air up through the soffit panels and go halfway through the floor system upstairs. It was really critical.
Are you still in that home, or did you move out?
Oh, you bet. Oh, no, you bet, because that's what motivates me every day to get out and help other people. That thing still doesn't work very well. I refuse to fix it for the most part, so I stay motivated. Now, the only thing I did fix, to be fair, was I did actually open up the overhang soffits. It's got an overhang on both sides of the building. I did open them up, and it was amazing. I expected the fiberglass bats to be literally blown out of position, capping off the end of the insulated floor, that's directly under the living space above. Mm-hmm. Those fiberglass bats were still right in place where they were. However, when I fixed that, maybe 6-7 years ago, I now knew that was not anywhere near good enough. What I needed was a really thorough air barrier. So I cut some half-inch foil-faced foam and fitted up in between the trusses and foamed it in on both sides of the building. And it was like overnight, you could tell the difference. I used to get in the bathtub upstairs that was like maybe 12 feet in from the outside, and that tub was honking cold. And as soon as I got done putting that foam with that integral air barrier concept, that bathtub was just amazingly warmer. I mean, like right honking now. So it was neat to take some of the things that were definitely wrong with that building and start working on a few of them, only to have a little bit more confidence in my teachings and our promotions on our program stuff as well. So it was good.
So let's tell listeners a little more about what you do now. I know you've been involved with these programs in Wisconsin, but I assume, is that as a subcontractor? Your main business is the home building technology services?
That's right, Joe. I'm still a private, independent, single-person, one-man business. I'm self-employed. But when the public benefits legislation went through in 1998 in Wisconsin, where everybody thought that was going to come through from California, the state looked at changing over the responsibility of utility programs delivering conservation efforts. They wanted to convert that to the private industry to relieve the utility companies from that responsibility. So I was already up and running with my consulting business, new home design consulting and performance evaluation. So I was contacted by Wisconsin Energy Conservation Corporation in Madison, a very large, nationally known, reputable organization doing conservation work. They asked me if I would help them design a new home program so that they could bid to try and get that new home program at the start of the public benefits process here in 1999. So I helped them with that. We were successful in getting that. And then after they won the contract for that, the manager down there called me one day and said, "Hey, we got the contract for the new homes program. You want to help us implement that?" So I partnered with them at that point. I'm still self-employed. I contract to them. So I've been serving as technical director for that program since 1999, since it was started. And when we first started that, we did it as a pilot project just in 23 counties for one utility company to see if we could actually pull it off, see if a private organization could actually pull off a new homes program. So we ran that for about 2 years, and then it was very, very successful. And then the State Public Service Commission told us then to take it statewide. So I've been very fortunate. I still have my consulting business, do a lot of private work, but then probably 70-75% of my time is in support of our new home program.
Is Wisconsin a little unique in that perspective? I mean, I know many states have programs, similar to that, but it sounds like Wisconsin's been pretty successful.
Well, that is correct, Joe, and I always like to take the time to give credit for why and how that got started. Because way back in the 90s, even mid-80s actually, Wisconsin Public Service, a utility company right here in Green Bay, Wisconsin, they used to do a program every year for conservation, and they called it Energy Update, just like Ned Nissen had his Energy Update Design magazine, that little publication from Connecticut. Well, then anyway, for years and years and years, they would hire Oliver Drurup to come down from Canada, one of the big guys that originally started the whole R2000 Better Built Home program in Canada. They hired Oliver to come down and do the building science training, and then they partnered with Ned Nissen from Energy Design Update magazine. And those two did a road show here, Joe. 7 different locations every year. It was standing room only. You couldn't get near the building if you didn't register the same year for the next year's training. It was spectacular. So way back in the early to mid-'80s, we had top-notch building science information from the get-go, from the horse's mouth, if you will. So we really had an upper hand on things in terms of how buildings function. And I'm staring right now, I mean, literally right in front of me, I'm staring at all the Canadian Home Builders Association manuals. And of the millions of publications I have in my office, those books are still as valuable and as accurate today as they were when they were written in the mid-'80s. Nothing really changed about building science. So back to your question, what makes it a little bit interesting in Wisconsin is that there was a very, very good, reputable, well-established core training curriculum, if you will, put on by the utility companies with not just somebody in the backyard. This was people that had already sorted all this stuff out. So it was spectacular. So then fast forward on that, when we took over with the Public Benefits New Homes program, we had to try and follow that, which was a pretty good challenge. However, in between that time, I had been going to all of those workshops that were put on. I became very good personal friends with Oliver Drurup, Joe Stiebrick, all of those guys. When I joined EBA in 1990, I was in that club big time, got to know everybody. Then I started going to the R2000 technical group meetings in Canada every year, went up there for like 7 years in a row. And so then we had all this information collected before the New Homes program was actually started in Wisconsin. So when I worked with WEC in Madison and 3 other co-authors to put a new home program together, we weren't just a couple of guys out in the backyard thinking of things, coming up with cornball stuff. We had the excellent basic background already that the Canadians and many others had already wrung out. So it's a great combination, and it still today is sort of a struggle to try and improve on all of that background.
And the program, I think the first program, it said certified over 16,000 homes in 11 years. Was that, how many homes are built a year in Wisconsin, new homes? Do you know?
Boy, that's a good one, Joe. You got me on that. I'm thinking right around maybe 15 to 18,000 on average over the course of time. What I do know is that our program has historically had about 25% participation, and sometimes higher than that on an annual basis. So whatever the actual new home construction starts were, we've been carrying about 25% plus of all the new homes built in Wisconsin have been going through our program.
I see.
So we're now on our 3rd upcoming revision to our new homes program. So it's seen a couple of cycles over time.
And it looks like you started, the first one was kind of an Energy Star. I guess it was based on the Energy Star program. And now you've gone to Statewide Focus On Energy New Homes. And I'm wondering, what's the difference? I mean, how much has changed from the original Energy Star program with the original program to now?
Well, that's another good question, Joe, and it's very easy to explain. What happened again in 1999 when we were putting together the first new homes program done outside of the utility companies with WEC now, I felt, okay, we don't need any building science help. We've got all of that. What we need now is something for marketing, for market acceptance. So at that time, of course, Sam Rashkin and a couple other folks were ramping up on the National Energy Star program that they started about 1995. Mm-hmm. So we contacted David Lee and Sam Rashkin, told them what we were doing, wanted to partner with them. but then we were already up to speed on what their version 2 was at that particular time, the requirements and everything. And we told them that those standards wouldn't be good enough here in Wisconsin because we're already building way beyond that. And so they came and met with us, and of course they told us that the National Home Builders Association didn't want more than one Energy Star program. They wanted one nationally, and we told them that we couldn't just adopt their version 2 at that time, or we could go borrow one of the farmers' milk trucks and go down every subdivision and simply spray holy water on every building without even getting out of the truck, because we were way beyond that. And so at that time, they worked with us, and they were very good partners. They worked with us then to allow us to change the name, so it was called the Wisconsin Energy Star Homes Program, and then we put in our own requirements above and beyond what they started with on version 2. I mean, we had enough background, and we knew enough about building science. So right out of the box, we started with an air tightness requirement for the buildings. We started with a whole house mechanical ventilation requirement. We started with closed combustion requirements. We started with sealed sump crock requirements. We started with spot ventilation, kitchen ventilation, all of the things that we knew were already wrung out by the building science community. Why start at a disadvantage? So we started out right out of the box with a very good group of standards. And the only one that we got beat up on early was the B-vent water heater issue. We refused to get involved with homes with anything that was natural draft combustion due to the fact that everyone had already figured out that tight homes are good, tighter's better, ventilation is always good, just don't suck on a chimney. So we got beat up at first, but after because we had a combustion safety requirement right from day one, and we refused and never have certified any building that did not meet all our requirements. But once we got testing, Joe, it was really interesting, because when you're talking about air, right, it's difficult. It's like talking about electricity. You either got to have it in your head that you understand it, because you certainly can't see it. But once we started showing the builders how tight their homes were, and that even turning on a typical vented range hood to the outside, how much it could depressurize a building, and then showed them that, and then showed them the federal depressurization limits for natural draft equipment, then it wasn't much of a problem after that. They finally got it because they could see it numerically on testing. So we started out really good out of the box. So we were able to go from 1999 through 2010 as the Wisconsin Energy Star Homes program, using the HERS 86 requirement that they had at that time when they were still going the other way, right, towards 100. And but then when the version 3 came out around 2010, the builders here pretty much had a riot, and we had Sam come in a couple of times to talk to our builder partners, and they just refused to pay the raters to do paperwork. It doesn't change the building. Some of the other requirements that they had, our building community just said that that's unacceptable to them. So we couldn't come to an agreement on something in the middle, and they were pretty much determined it had to be V3 or nothing. Then we parted with Energy Star in 2011 and started our own, which then went from a Wisconsin Energy Star Homes program to simply Focus on Energy new home program. Didn't miss a beat, didn't lose one builder. All the issues where people felt that Energy Star had such a compelling argument to participation that we would fall off the face of the earth if we lost that recognition. Not one builder left, not one builder at all. In fact, our participation has gone up ever since. So that was pretty interesting.
I got several questions. I want to try and organize this a little bit. Let's start with the original program when you were still part of Energy Star Homes program. Sure. How you said about 25% of the new homes were part of that program. The other 75%, they were just building your basic code home?
Yeah, but again, that is correct in a generic statement there, Joe.
Okay.
But what's interesting again is I want to refer back to all that training that was done here by the utility companies since the mid '80s. So we often see this right in magazines. I'm just reading Martin Holliday's new book, Musings of an Energy Nerd. Very good book. But it's interesting, right? It's often quoted that people that are only building to code are building the worst home that's legally possible. I find that personally offensive because if it's done correctly, those buildings can haul the mail against other people that do all kinds of interesting additional things and then don't put things together correctly. So, yes, you're correct. The other 75% are building to our state code. We are one of the few states in the country that actually has code enforcement, by the way. So our codes may be behind numerically in the national code cycle, but there is actually code inspection. And I'll tell you what, some of those homes are very, very well done, and we know that to be true. We just did a market characterization study here this calendar year. Yep.
So how do you get the consumers in Wisconsin to recognize, that the homes that are part of the program are built in a way that is going to be a little more energy efficient and probably more, they're going to last a little longer, et cetera? How do you do that?
Well, that's always been a challenge, Joe, and I think any other program implementer around the country, regardless of what their program is, has the same challenge, and it makes it even more difficult to do that marketing pitch if your baseline homes are already pretty good, and if they're not coming apart or terrible like most magazine publications would indicate that they are.
Mm-hmm.
But back to your question, we still used a lot of the sort of the promotional material that we partnered with Energy Star at first, having a consultant slash resident rater. Here we call them consultants instead of using the word rater. So we still market that, hey, if you want to know numerically if something would be a good idea on your particular building, so, say you want to add R5 to a house you're going to build anyway. If you want to know exactly, given our fuel cost, our building practices, what that would do on your unique home for you, the homeowner, we can model all that because every one of our program homes, 100% of them, since day one, have always been modeled using the REMRate New Home software. They've always had site visits during testing. Site visits during construction to verify that things were done with a report to the builder during construction, and we've always tested every building. So over time, we've built a pretty good credibility base that most of the home builders now that know what the program does, and if we get a few minutes of time with a homeowner, we can show them the advantages of building a home through the program. And in many cases, in addition to some of the requirements that we have that are not part of the code, we can show them that, hey, you may actually be able to build that home more cost effectively than what you were going to do just by grabbing stuff off the shelves or looking on the internet and then telling your builder you want this, you want that, you want that. Nobody models things for performance outside of our program, but we do on every home. But it's still a challenge, yes. And then, of course, our statewide effort has some incentives available, too, for homes that are certified, so it does offer a little bit of financial reward at the end.
Okay, so you get a little bit of an incentive there. And what about with the new program? How are you marketing that new program, the Focus on Energy New Homes? Is that something the utilities are helping with or the state?
Well, actually, Joe, that's a good one, too, because the tagline for Focus on Energy is partnering with Wisconsin utilities, because we are a partner with the utilities, but we are delivering the services, privately. But the marketing is still pretty much the same. We have online marketing, we have publications, brochures, and so forth. We do home shows, and then most of it's pretty small in terms of the marketing effort. Luckily, since we've been around this year now for 15 years, over 15 years, we've got a core group of followings in the building community. The other thing that happens, Joe, is that because we do so much training and very good training, if I might say, that building tradespeople, might be an insulator, framing contractor, HVAC contractor, electrical guy, plumbing guy, shows up to one of our trainings and then gets a little taste of what we're all about in terms of the program, who we are, our background, our credibility, the actual things that we represent. They kind of work as sort of our background marketing core as they pitch their products and services to consumers and builders. We're hoping if they've had a good experience working with us on one of our projects that they'll also pitch the program. And I would say a lot of our referrals come from that word of mouth.
And before we go to halftime, we're going to go to halftime here in just a moment. But before we do, I live in rural Pennsylvania here, and I'm served by a rural electric cooperative. And I know a lot of Wisconsin is rural as well. Have the rural electric cooperatives been working with your program as much as the big guys in the cities?
Well, that's another great one, Joe. Early on, some of the rural co-ops, as I understand them here, that only have electricity as a product, right?
Right.
Most of the other major players have gas, natural gas, and electricity. But early on, probably that first 10 years when we were doing Energy Star, there were several rural co-ops that felt that we didn't have enough to offer them because we tended to lean towards natural gas and so forth, and that when we modeled homes, obviously using electric heating, so forth, like they would offer, they sometimes didn't pan out so well in the modeling. So there was a little bit of a disconnect there at first, but once the issue went to where now everything is under the Focus on Energy umbrella, we had a lot more of them, Joe, that actually came across. We got a chance to work with them a little bit closer. So our relationship with them has been much, much better now since we're under the Focus on Energy umbrella.
Gotcha. Well, Joe, thank you. We're going to be back. We have to stop and thank our sponsors here at halftime. On the second half of the interview, I want to talk a little more specifically about the types of requirements you have for the program. Are ductwork allowed to go through attics? Can you put a mechanical system in an attic? What about exterior insulation? So we'll get into a lot more of that after halftime. We'll be back with our guest, Joe Nagan, in about 90 seconds.
IAQ Radio would like to thank our association sponsors. The Indoor Air Quality Association, a nonprofit multidisciplinary organization dedicated to promoting the exchange of indoor environmental information through education and research. Visit them at IAQA.org. Gray Wolf Sensing Solutions, who use advanced sensor software technology and embedded computers to provide superior environmental test instrumentation. Visit them, wolfsense.com. IAQ marquee sponsors are John Don Products, where restoration and abatement contractors shop. Visit them at johndon.com. That's JONDON.com. Healthy Indoor Magazine, a free online digital magazine for industry professionals and consumers. Subscriptions are available at IAQ.net. Particles Plus, engineers and manufacturers feature rich particle counters, air quality monitoring, instrumentation, and vacuum pump technology. ParticlesPlus.com. Count on us.
Okay, we're back. We've got the second half of our interview today with Joe Nagan, and it's been very interesting, Joe. What I'd like to do now is get into some specifics, and let's start with the differences between, let me go all the way back to the first program. Right when the beginning of the show, you mentioned within your home vapor barriers, and that was a big topic back in the, late 90s, early 90s, back in the energy days. Are you able to use a plastic vapor barrier on interior walls and get away with it in that cold climate?
You mean on the inside of exterior walls, Joe?
Correct, yes.
Yeah. Yes, and a matter of fact, that's probably the de facto vapor retarder material used here in Wisconsin, but we are certainly having that ongoing dialogue reminding the builders, similar to what's happening at the national level related to cold climate building, that the plastic vapor retarder itself, if that's someone's choice, is probably not in your best interest due to summertime problems. And I've been chasing more summertime problems in wall cavities here than I'm ever chasing on wintertime cold weather problems that people thought that the vapor retarder was intended to prevent. So, yeah, they're using it, and I'll bet you 75 to 80% at least, Joe, are using plastic as their choice of vapor retarder material.
What does the program recommend now?
Well, this is interesting. See, we only have a limited number of requirements, but since you did use the word recommendation, what we're always trying to do is provide as accurate and reliable local information to our builder partners so that they can make better informed decisions. So even though they have to comply with the code, and we always encourage that, we still try to get them more into a conversation, Joe, in terms of why are you using that plastic sheet as your choice to meet the vapor retarder requirements here in Wisconsin? Because no one has ever required a plastic sheet anywhere in the state of Wisconsin, and in most national codes, the building code only requires that the air permeable insulation have a vapor retarder material having a perm rating of 1.0. That's it. But what happened when the craft face bats were very popular here and the dominant material back when we were doing 2x4 walls, when the thermal resistance on that craft face paper started, all of a sudden the manufacturers changed the labeling where they then required a thermal barrier covering. Builders stopped using the craft face bats where they wanted to leave some walls exposed, and then somebody grabbed a sheet of plastic, and bang, by default, that became the dominant, and it still is, choice. So we're trying to engage them in a conversation, not to tell them that we don't like them using the plastic. We're trying to get them to be more conversational, to get them thinking about it, and then explain to them what we know is actually happening. Because we're on the ground here in Wisconsin every day. Our consultants are out there every day, probably 7 days a week, 365, looking at buildings. And contrary to what people read in national publications, buildings ain't exploding like they claim they are. And so we're trying to get people more, Joe, to think about what they're doing to make better choices.
Well, what choice would you make?
Well, I'm often asking the people that unless they had some personal building conviction that they needed to have or they would feel uncomfortable selling a new home, I would be recommending good, excellent air sealing procedures, which are easy enough to do, and I'd be using vapor retarder paint.
Vapor retarder paint?
Right, because it's always been an option here in the state of Wisconsin, and it is everywhere else.
So on the drywall, you paint your drywall?
You could use vapor retarder primer or vapor retarder paint. Now, I got to give our code credit here, Joe, because in Wisconsin that's always been allowed as an option, which is why we continue to ask the building community, why are you putting that piece of plastic up there? That is not a vapor retarder. That's a vapor barrier beyond what the code requires for winter protection, and it's causing more problems on inward moisture drying in the winter, in the summer, even here in Wisconsin. So in our building code, it just says that if you're going to use the vapor retarder paint as your choice to meet the vapor retarder requirements, you have to fill out a form, Joe, and then provide it to the building inspector at the time you go to get the permit. So when you call them to come and look at the job, they're not expecting to see a sheet of plastic.
Gotcha. All right, let's go to the next one. What about mechanical systems in attics? What's the recommendation on that?
Oh, okay. Well, again, Joe, if we look at our local building practices in Wisconsin, I don't have a number on this, but I would guesstimate quite reliably that the overwhelming majority of new homes here are basement homes.
Okay.
Which means that the furnace, the air handler is going to be in the basement, and the overwhelming majority of ductwork is going to be there in the basement, in conditioned space, as we would call it. However, some two-story homes that get a little big, just due to the nature of being able to move air and be able to do that reliably, it's not uncommon that they may put a second air handler on the second floor in a closet, but the ductwork may then go up into the attic of that second floor. We have bonus rooms over garages where they take a branch off of the air handler in the basement, run it up through the garage rim, and it goes up in the floor system. Anytime that's done, the code obviously requires air sealing on that ductwork, and it requires duct testing in Wisconsin, as it does anywhere where you got 2009 code or newer. But we're always trying to engage them again. Is there some other way of doing it? And it's a struggle if you have to put some out there. But then if they're going to do it, let's just make sure it works. So let's make sure it is airtight and that we can bury that or build a chase even in the attic, which is allowable here, and then make sure that it delivers the air at the temperature we need to satisfy the loads of the building.
Okay, let's go to those basements again, and let's talk a little bit about insulation in basements. How are you handling that? Are you having builders put insulation under the slab? Are they using it on the exterior of the foundation walls?
Okay, excellent. Joe, what happens again in Wisconsin is that whether they're just doing a home to meet code, they still have to meet, either res check formula or whatever. So in most cases, again, the overwhelming majority is going to use exterior extruded polystyrene foam insulation on the outside to whatever thickness and R value they need to meet code or the design goal for that building. So sometimes they'll have maybe some interior finished areas in the lower level that may then have some additional stick framing on the inside. Now back to the basement floors. In most cases, Joe, there's hardly any insulation used under a basement floor in Wisconsin. Now, that doesn't mean we don't talk about it. We always talk about it in our new home program, because if we get a house plan, and even if it's a spec home and we see an egress window in the basement wall, we know that builder is setting that home up so the eventual owner may be able to put some living space down there. Mm-hmm. In that case, we know that there's going to be a floor covering, which means then that floor covering is going to probably lower the slab temperature by insulating it with carpet on top. Then we're going to get into discussion about the use of foam under the slab for controlling surface temperature, because you could model that until you run out of software. You're not going to show much on energy savings versus the cost of foam, even if it's just 1 inch.
Okay. So you're looking at cold surfaces more so than energy savings.
Yeah, absolutely, because obviously we're concerned that if you throw carpeting on a floor, now you just insulated that concrete floor from the ambient air in the basement. And if the concrete is sitting on gravel, touching the soil below at 55 to 60 degrees, it's going to want to drift towards that temperature. So the water vapor in the basement air can freely go through the carpet fibers and touch the top of that slab, which now may be cool enough to cause it to sweat out, especially even if it just gets a little damp in the summer if they have basement windows open. So we're always recommending it for comfort. Even if they're not going to insulate, carpet the basement floor, it does help with radiant heat transfer from the floor above, which is uninsulated in Wisconsin homes. Because if we model it, Joe, I'll bet on average you wouldn't save $15 to $20 a year on any energy modeling for energy savings with an inch of sheet foam.
Okay, let's go to another common topic of discussion when we talk building science. I assume you have some crawl spaces in Wisconsin, maybe not as many as we find in other parts of the country, but on occasion I would imagine you run into them. What are the requirements or the recommendations on crawl spaces?
Okay, again, you're correct. On new home construction, other than someone maybe doing a real nice module, Joe, out in the country in a rural area, we have a lot of good module manufacturers here. Where a homeowner might be the general contractor, they may do a vented crawl space, but the typical builder and the typical crawl space, if it's built in Wisconsin, would be an unvented, fully conditioned short basement is what it is.
Okay. And let's talk.
Because then we want to be able to put the air handler down there, say.
Yes, absolutely. All right. Let's talk ventilation.
There you go.
That's a topic, that obviously gets some people's blood going, and we've got the ASHRAE standard 62.2, which I'm still,
Oh, yeah.
Not an expert on certainly, but why don't we just throw out the topic of ventilation and let you talk a little bit about how your program handles that topic.
Oh, excellent. So I'm going to watch the clock so we don't get too far out of line here, but thank you for that question, Joe.
Okay.
What's really interesting, again, is that I want to set that up real quick, is that our program has had a partnership with the building community. And our agreement with them is we're going to do everything we can to help you stay ahead of the curve, which is an advantage to participating. With that, we have always had a whole house ventilation requirement in our program since 1999. It was just 7.5 CFM per person at that time, no building volume ventilation rate, but we always had that, and we always will continue. Now, what happened was, as we were watching things go by over the years, and we saw the first ASHRAE 62.2 coming out, right, when they first started the 62.2 series, we decided, hey, let's take a look and see what our current group of homes look like, because we were out, for like 4 years. So we actually, in 2002, we hired the Energy Center of Wisconsin, a real good nationally recognized research organization now called Seventh Wave. Anyway, we hired them to look at a random sample of our program-certified homes, of which they selected the homes. We didn't cherry-pick anything. And they did the most spectacular, the only one I know of to date, where they actually evaluated what was happening in real buildings with real people, not some cornball test setup. So in the end, we wanted to know, the question we asked them to answer for us is, if the 62.2 was adopted by the program, what would our buildings look like? And in the end, after Scott Pigg got done doing all this modeling, the buildings all had enough capacity to meet the original 2003 version of 62.2 if we were to adopt it. So that was what we wanted to know. But what was really cool is he did tracer gas analysis and everything on these buildings to actually confirm what you cannot do by yourself, and that is, what is the actual air exchange rate on any building? You cannot measure that with a blower door. You can only measure that with tracer gas analysis. So he did a really elaborate report. It's all available free on the internet. So we had a good heads up at that point. And what was really interesting in one of his concluding summaries, because some of these homes had balanced HRVs, very few had ERVs, and I would say the majority of them had exhaust only. Nobody here by choice uses supply ventilation. But what was really neat is that even when you looked at all the carbon dioxide levels, and he had data loggers on all the equipment, so we could tell when any fan ran, when the power vent water heater ran, we tested all of that stuff. So even though they monitored carbon dioxide in the master bedroom like everybody likes to do, there was no problem there whatsoever. His conclusion was that if these homes were actually operated to the 62.2 requirement in terms of actual 24/7 function, they would probably dry the crap out of them.
Interesting. And
oh yeah, and that was done back in 2003. So then when the ASHRAE 62 did come out, then we did adopt the original 62.2 as a standard, and rather than we included, the 1 CFM per 100 square foot addition. So, and we still use it.
And you still, even in the program, you recommend, you allow just exhaust only ventilation. Are you urging people to go to balanced ventilation at all, or?
Well, that's a good one, Joe. And here's the history on that, because we got a ton of history. I mean, a ton. All right. Back when we started the program, we were, again, our partnership with the building community is to let them know what's out there. So we pitched a lot of balanced ventilation at the time. We ran the models, did the whole 9 yards. And several of the builders really thought that balanced ventilation was a good idea, right? It was, sort of up and running back in the early 2000s when we got going. Well, here's exactly what they found, Joe, and I'm staring at a 1973 research report by the Canadian Home Mortgage Corporation that found back then the same exact thing we find today, is that when somebody starts out with a balanced ventilation system for all the right reasons, due to homeowner no maintenance, it will more than likely turn into an exhaust-only system within 6 months anyway, because the intake screen on the outside plugs up and no one ever goes out there and looks at it. So the builders that were originally doing balanced ventilation in our program, and we had quite a few of them, and if you think about it, there's some big manufacturers here in Wisconsin. And now I'll bet we don't have 5% of our homes every year have balanced mechanical ventilation for that very reason. And since they weaned themselves away from it, they reduced all the callbacks associated with no maintenance, balanced ventilation problems, and now they know that even though they're getting their homes tighter than they were back in 1999, they're still not experiencing any problems. And because the program, Joe, right out of the box in 1999, recognized all the good work that was done in Canada, Alaska, and everywhere else, that said, there's nothing wrong with running a building slightly negative if your choice is exhaust only, as long as, you're not sucking on a combustion device or sucking on the ground. Okay. We had from day one a combustion safety requirement to avoid running the building negative and sucking on a chimney, and we had a ground cover disconnect. So right now, 95% of our buildings run exhaust only, and we got new homes in our program that are running right down at passive house air tightness.
Very interesting.
And they work just fine.
Wow. And are you...
Well, I got to put this caveat in, and I'm watching the time.
Please.
Here's what we do know as well. People here do not run their ventilation 24/7. I can't find one person that does that.
Okay.
Yeah. They're capable of it, so they meet the requirement, but nobody runs them full time.
Well, we're running a little low, but let me throw out a couple quick ones here. What do you see in the future of the program? I mean, are things going to get a little tighter? Or are you going to? Well, just talk. What kind of new requirements do you see possibly happening in the future, or recommendations?
Well, timing is perfect on the question, because right now, Joe, physically right now on the calendar, we are in process of implementing a new program new program requirements for the start of 2018. And now, as a result of the Public Service Commission, again hiring this Energy Center, Seventh Wave organization, to do a market characterization study of homes that were not in our program. As a result of that, we were required to go back to the drawing board and up the ante substantially. So we are in the process of finalizing that with the folks at Noresco, our REM-rate software people, to get because we have a special version of REM-rate software. So the bar is going to be raised pretty good in 2018. So now some of the items that our builders somewhat didn't buy into or refused to do before, mainly on building envelope features, if they want to continue to participate, are going to have to look at several of those next year, or we will lose participation. However, we're confident that we've built enough credibility with the building community that they're going to work with us, but we're in process of that right now.
Can you give us an example of one of those topics, issues that builders are a little resistant on?
Well, okay. Well, what happened, Joe, was this. We were always using our Uniform Dwelling Code in Wisconsin for our program requirements. So if you wanted to get a home certified in the program, it had to be at least 15% better than the current code. So our software was set up so that it would build two homes, just like all other program software. As a result of the characterization study that was recently done and publicly published now, they found that as a result of our program for 15 years, we changed the entire building community in the state of Wisconsin. They gave us credit for market transformation. And unlike most states that would can a program, when you reach what did they just say there? Market penetration.
Yep.
They said, no, we want this thing to continue because there's not much going on here with codes. So anyway, what's going to happen next year is that to get to the reduction in energy consumption to meet the new goals, some builders are probably going to have to look at things that they currently won't like. That may mean substantial increases in foundation insulation, which would more than likely mean stick framing on the inside, in addition to the exterior foam they're currently doing, Most builders here will refuse to do exterior sheet foam. I mean, they will refuse to do it just for the inconvenience. And they're building way beyond what the code requires anyway in terms of bare code requirements. But that may be a problem. I'm sure most of them aren't going to switch to, complete spray foam and wall cavity. They might bump up the windows a little bit, but the bar, as a result of this baseline study, Joe, has now upped substantially, so that to keep our program cost effective, which is a requirement, we have to get more savings from each of these homes to meet our program goals, as the program implementer is WEC in Madison. So it'll be an interesting discussion. We've had builder roundtable group meetings, and we'll be going out again before the end of the year, meeting with some more of our larger participating builders. But it's showtime, because it was conclusively shown that as a result of all the program activity throughout the 15-year history, including all the training we've done, you cannot show a builder how to do all these neat things and then take it away from them when they decide to build a home for somebody not in the program, right? Mm-hmm. So we did actually achieve market transformation. That's the word I was looking for. But now we're going to see how faithful our builder partners are and see if we can't continue to get them to participate. We were able to leave a certification level in there so they could continue with certification, the consultant modeling, the site visits, the testing, and certification documentation without incentives, as to see if we can get them to carry over. But on the certification levels 2, 3, and 4 that have pretty substantial financial incentives, they're going to have to ratchet up the building somehow to get more savings to meet those thresholds. So it's going to be a very interesting year, coming from where we were originally to where we were the last 6-7 years. Going forward, it'll be interesting. And to shoot us in the foot a little bit, they're giving natural gas away here, so that doesn't help either.
They're giving it, so the prices are really low on natural gas?
Oh, yeah, about 58 cents a therm.
Wow. Okay. Well, Joe, this has been very interesting. I'm going to have to listen again, because there's a few things that kind of went over my head there, to be honest with you. Yeah, I get a little confused, and I really appreciate you joining us, and look forward to talking more in the future. Before we go, is there anything you'd like to add? I mean, I guess the one question I really didn't get to talk to you about, you kind of implied, as far as the costs, what's the cost difference between a home built that meets the program recommendations and one that just meets the typical code requirements in Wisconsin?
Well, it's a very popular question, and one that I still don't have a reliable one answer for, Joe. It all depends on what the builder's currently doing, right? Mm-hmm. A builder may be doing way above code, which most of them are, and they may only need to do 1 or 2 small items to get in the program on the entry level. But there is a cost to have the consultant work with them, do the REM rate modeling, the consulting, testing, all that. That ranges anywhere from $350 to probably $600, $700, depending on what the builder is looking for. And then any additional construction cost, that depends on what they're doing, which again is why I mentioned earlier that unless people are doing some sort of energy modeling up front, and people can argue about the accuracy of modeling, we feel it's very reliable for what we're doing, and we have that field verified here. If you don't do energy modeling up front, it's my personal opinion that people may wind up building homes that are more expensive than they need to be, because when you're using internet marketing as your method of quantifying a product for your individual building, that's like shooting darts. Mm-hmm. What works on one building may not work on another. And oftentimes people get after us, well, yeah, if we build in your program, Joe, it's always so expensive. I believe it's actually the opposite, because some people will spend a boatload of money on a component that they believe is going to make a major difference from the reference point that the builder would use anyway. And they wind up doing things to make that home more expensive because they had no way of quantifying the actual benefit of that product on their unique building. So it's sort of a cat and mouse game, but we love doing it. Our consultants are very good. Our program is good. WEC is very good as an implementer in Madison, and we're very fortunate that the Public Service Commission and the administrator here has enough confidence in us that we can keep moving the entire state building community forward.
Well, Joe, thank you. And Cliff, I kind of didn't really get you a chance to jump in here in the second half. Is there anything you wanted to add or any questions?
No, I'm good, Joe.
All right. Well, Joe Nagan, thank you so much for joining us. It's been a real pleasure. And before we go, any final comments from you?
No, I think that, just always for people that are listening that they're going to have a home built, or even for builders, do your homework. You got to remember that people involved in the energy business have a vested interest, and if you're looking at sorting things out, sometimes you got to look the other direction once in a while and get some independent information.
Very good, Joe. Well, thanks again for joining us. This week's guest, Joe Nagan, out of Wisconsin, and the Home Building Technology Services is the name of his company. And we can also maybe get some contact information for listeners if it's okay with you. We'll put it in the blog. The Z-Man is writing a blog right now, and we'll run that by you before we put it out next week, Joe.
Excellent.
All right.
Thanks for having me. Let's do this again.
Thank you very much, and we'll definitely take you up on that. It was a great interview, very interesting. I want to thank my co-host, the Z-Man, Cliff Zlotnick, at the controls. John, you gotta have faith. Most importantly, our growing group of loyal listeners. We'll be back next Friday at noon. We're going to be talking to Pete Consigli at the TPA conference they're doing in Nashville, Tennessee. We're going back to the restoration side of things next week, and look forward to a great show with Pete, the restoration industry's global watchdog. This is Radio Joe Hughes saying thanks, and come back and join us again next Friday at noon for the next broadcast of IAQ Radio.
For IAQ Radio, I'm Spike Reel saying thanks for listening.